expecting all these things from Barack Obama as if he's the man who can do it. There's a congressional role, there's a judicial role.
We agree on that.
And it's not just him. There's more that needs to be done.
Professor, let me just see if I can help put some of this in context as well. You look at what has happened in 2013. We've got, obviously, the Trayvon Martin that everybody's talking about. This is happening to black boys across this country every day. You look at the fact that we have a Supreme Court that just gutted the Voting Rights Act. You look, and are trying to do the same thing with affirmative action. You look at a House of Representatives who just last week took food stamps out of the Farm Bill. You look at this past week where they have decided to block grant Title I. We are being attacked from so many sides that you have to at some point decide where you can have the most impact. Now, I think that the president said what he believed. He tried to make people understand that this is not just about some kid with a hoodie. But I think also we have to look at the fact that there is a broader discussion that we need to have. Yes, we need to have a discussion on race, but we also need to have a discussion on how we are treating poor and minority people in this country.
How about the particular issue of the law that seemed to loom so large over this situation, and that is the Stand Your Ground law. In Florida, 21 other states that really redefine the concept of what we consider to be self-defense. The Attorney General was in Florida this week, and he spoke about it in a way that the President echoed later. Here's what the Attorney General said.
It's time to question laws that senselessly expand the concept of self-defense and sow dangerous conflict in our neighborhoods. These laws try to fix something that was never broken. There has always been a legal defense for using deadly force if, and the if is important, if no safe retreat is available.
Now, Michael Steele, some Republicans have immediately politicized this into the gun debate and said, and when I say politicized, I'm not making a judgment, but they are putting this into the gun argument about the ability to defend oneself. In this particular case, you had the police officers who told George Zimmerman, don't pursue this young man.
That's right.
Don't do that. He gets back into his car, he says he feels threatened, and he follows him.
Anyway.
That's what the Attorney General, what the President's talking about.
Well, and that's what the facts tell us. But the question now becomes is this a proper role for the federal government to go into all
versus the states?
Versus the states, to go into all 21 states now and tell them how to change their laws or to remake their laws? No. I mean, this is something that's going to have to get worked out state by state. You have 21 states, other states out there as well. So it's not just Florida. So when we start this conversation, you have people talking about, well, I'm going to boycott Florida. I'm not going to perform there. I'm not going to go there. Well, you're not going to go to the 21 other states. There's got to be some level of consistency, number one. Number two, on the political side of it, again, the facts of the Trayvon Martin case, this was not brought into it. This was not the underlying argument that was made. The defense backed off of that as a defense. But I understand.
However,
but can I ask the professor?
There was a jury instruction, and people have missed the fact that the jury instruction was cited by one of the jurors as the reason for the acquittal. So it was an issue in the case. And these Stand Your Ground laws, what's striking about them is how they got on the books. They got on the books because of an effort by the NRA in conjunction with the with ALEC to introduce them and pass them in states across the nation. It is the role of the nation's Chief Justice Officer, who is the Attorney General.
But Mark, do you know who views the Stand Your Ground law in Florida the most? Is African Americans.
In fact, Michael, it's not just
but that doesn't,
Florida.
But I'm just saying.
The reality is that another group pushed to Stand Your Ground, but African Americans have been using them around the country.
But it's also led.
But the hypocrisy, since Mark mentioned the NRA, the hypocrisy of the NRA is on full display here. We have not as yet heard, and I predict that you will never hear the NRA say that if Trayvon Martin had had a gun, he'd still be alive. No, they haven't said it as yet, Tree. They haven't said it as yet. They haven't said that.
Let's put that out there.
Yeah, it's out there.
Put it right here.
The most important thing is that the Stand Your Ground law is one of the things that has incited and ignited, I believe, this movement across the nation, which I think, David, is the beginning of a new civil rights movement, to challenge these issues. Because of what the Congresswoman has said, the landscape has changed. The Voting Rights Act decision by the Supreme Court, which was striking in its superficiality, the Trayvon Martin incident, and everything from the police officers not arresting George Zimmerman at the very beginning, to the need for a special prosecutor, to the fact that the special prosecutor herself did not participate in trying the case, to the composition of the jury, to the way in which the case was tried, all the way to the verdict, strikes people as just mountains of evidence.
Well, let me ask this, Professor. The Attorney General is looking at this as a potential civil rights violation against George Zimmerman. I heard the President, to me, sort of lower expectations for that being made. Why? On what basis?
The reality is that this is not a federal issue. It's a state issue. And states have moved forward and talking about stand your ground, a lot of other issues as well. And I think he's saying the federal government can't do anything. We can be behind that. Rodney King, it was the state that started and didn't do well, and then the federal government came in. And a lot of these cases of people being assassinated, people being killed, being beaten, the federal government is there and responsive to that, but not the one who.
And I think, David, that's what the protesters, and I celebrate them. I applaud the efforts in these 100 cities yesterday. But I think what they missed is what you just astutely pointed out. The president basically said to us, without saying to us, this ain't going no further. You can march and protest and rally, but I don't think the justice.
I don't think he said that. Let me say this.
I didn't say he said it.
Let me say this. The mistake that people make is to prejudge an investigation before it takes place.
Well, the Attorney General will decide, but the President did seem to.
But when you talk about legislation, I understand about the stand your ground laws, but there are some things we can do. We as a Congressional Black Caucus, have put in place, at least dropped over the last couple of weeks, racial profiling laws, because that's what this was. I don't care what they say it was. That is what it was. And so if we start to do some things from the congressional perspective, maybe they can help. But let me just say this. I don't care how many laws you put in place. You cannot legislate against prejudice or bias or racism. You cannot do it. And so all we can do is the best we can.
But that goes to Tavis's point about the morality of the question.
Can I put something else on the table that goes to the racial profiling debate that is provocative? It was from Bill Cohen in the Washington Post, his column on Monday. I'll put it up on the screen and get your reaction to it. Richard Cohen, excuse me. Where is the politician, he writes, who will own up to the painful complexity of the problem and acknowledge the widespread fear of crime committed by young black males? This does not mean that raw racism has disappeared and some judgments are not the product of invidious stereotyping. It does mean, though, that the public knows young black males commit a disproportionate amount of crime. In New York City, blacks make up a quarter of the population, yet they represent 78% of all shooting suspects, almost all of them young men. And Tavis, the President made a point of acknowledging that.
He's right. He acknowledged that, number one. Number two, most blacks are killed by other African Americans, and most whites are killed by other whites. And I'm sick and tired of having this debate as if there's something unusual about that. You kill people in the communities where you live and work and rob. That's how this works, number one. But with all due respect to Marc and Tree, all I'm saying is this. This is not a Chronos moment. This is a Kairos moment. The President, again, is the right person at the right place at the right time to do more. I am not a part of that anything is enough generation. I want the President to step in this moment, as Cohen just pointed out, and lead us in a complex conversation about these very difficult issues. I don't want him to shrink from the calling of this moment historically, and we are going to regret this later on.
Finally, Tavis, in 3 years, we found something we agree on.
But back to your point about New York City, one of the reasons that African-American men tend to make up a disproportionate number is because of profiling. You've got two kids on the street, in New York in particular, with their stop and frisk policies, they're going to pick up the black kid. Not to say that the white kid wasn't committing a crime, but that kid gets in the system and never gets out. Or they decide, you know what, he's from a good family. Let's put him in a diversion program. But the black kid gets a record. Profiling has a lot to do with those numbers as well, and they are skewed based upon the perception that black kids.
But one thing that's going to have to be on the table is the economic opportunity.
That's correct.
And
Absolutely.
for there to be jobs. And the obstructionism about summer jobs, jobs plans, jobs training that's taking place in this nation after the recession when this unemployment rate is so high, it can't be done with a law enforcement approach alone. It has to be done with an economic opportunity.